ladies? Are we ready? Right, good afternoon everybody, and welcome to this licensing committee meeting for Monday the 28th of February. So I will start with apologies.
Councillors Jones, Evans and Weston.
Well, thank you very much. Is anyone aware of any other apologies? I think apart from that, everyone's. Well, Councillor Mosley and Spink aren't here, but we'll give. Hopefully, they might turn up. We'll see how that goes. Okay, moving on to the minutes of the last meeting. The meeting was held on the 3rd of June last year. I take it we've all seen the minutes, so they're in the paper. Go on, seconder, yeah. Everybody in favour? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. So, moving on, public question time. There are no members of the public present. Declaration, sorry, missed one. Declarations of interest. No. So, public question time. As I said, there isn't any members of the public present. I'm not aware of any questions. So, we shall move on further. Yes. Okay, can we note that, please? Urgent business. I'm unaware of any urgent business. Mr. Winchcombe, are you aware of any urgent business? No.
No, Chair.
Thank you very much. So I will move on to the substantive part of why we're here. Number 5, report of the Director of Neighbourhoods, review of Hackney Carriage Table of Fares, pages 7 to 24 in your agenda pack.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, committee. Thank you for coming this afternoon to discuss this paper. As many of you know, that Hackney Carriage licences, Hackney Carriage vehicles on the Isle of Wight are required to have a taximeter fitted, which displays the maximum fare that each taxi driver can charge for that journey. It is this council's policy that we set those fares in accordance with the relevant legislation, and on an annual basis we review those fares to make sure that they are correct in taking into account a number of issues which are set out in the report. This year we undertook that review and chose to consult with the trade. It was quite unanimous from the trade that they wanted an increase to the fare tax, the table of fares, and they cited increase in fuel, servicing, insurance, etc., and the general cost of running a taxi as a reason to increase the tables of fares. As a part of that consultation, many of them suggested alternative tariffs, which we took into account. As a result of that, officers put together a document which had various different options on it, which is attached as Appendix 2. We consulted on that document, and the trade come back and felt that option 4 was the tariff that they would wish to go through, and that was based on the majority of responses that we've got. There is in that document there is a few little graphs that show you the percentage increase or percentage decision. There is now a taxi group on the island, and we chose to give them a greater weighting and a one-off. So we gave them a weighting of 10 for their general proposals. They do indicate that they've got a membership of over 50, but I do know that some of those people who were a member of that also sent in their own representation. So to avoid double counting, we didn't want to give them 50, we chose to give them the 10. So as a result of that, Appendix 4 sets out a revised table of affairs taking into account the trade's wishes, which we would probably propose to move on to carry out the consultation which we were required to do under the legislation. Circulated before the meeting was an A4 bit of paper headed flowchart for setting table of affairs. At this moment, we are in the first box. We will then need to advertise this table for 14 days in the public. The public will have the ability to consult and sending representations of their views of the proposed table of affairs. If there are any outstanding representations at the end of that 14 days, then we will need to bring another report back to this committee to determine what that table of affairs should look like, taking into account all of the representations that we received, the public and the trade. So today's decision is to move to advertise that table of affairs as Appendix 4 and carry out that consultation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Before we start the discussion, and I'm sure there will be a short discussion on this, I'd like to point out a couple of points. First of all, the point that Kevin mentioned, that this is very much the beginning of the process. This is not the final affairs by any stretch of the imagination. This is the beginning of a fairly complicated process, as shown on this diagram, of actually setting the fare. In discussions with officers, it's become clear that this was something that we needed to look at. I know from my own personal experience and working life outside of the council, that sometimes getting taxis at certain times is quite difficult, which suggests to me a lack of supply of taxis at certain times, which could be easily traced back perhaps to it not being financially viable to run taxis at certain times. So that is obviously an issue, and it is a supply and demand issue. So I think it's right and fair we go out to the public and consult on this. But the second point that I wanted to make very clear for everyone listening is that what we're setting is the maximum fare that a taxi can charge. This is not the fare, it's not the minimum fare, it is the maximum fare that they can charge. They are free to charge less if they so choose, but they cannot charge more than the amount that we set at the end of this process. And I think there's a certain amount of misunderstanding amongst the public of what our role is, and sometimes we're painted as the bad guys by increasing what they're allowed to charge. But at the end of the day, we have to take into consideration economic factors. I read this morning that petrol has now gone past £1.50 a litre on average across the country. 6 months ago, that was much closer to £1. You know, things are changing fast. There are legitimate reasons why these drivers might well require additional income. So I'll leave that there and hand it over to any comments. Councillor Bacon. Oops.
Thank you, Chair. I was, prior to the explanation we just had, going to ask a little more detail about the consultation that's taken place, because we've not seen the responses, but just the document that was produced on the basis of those. I'm assuming the responses were fairly uniform to produce that table, or can you give a little more flavour as to the responses that were received and how they led to the four options?
I believe it's Appendix 3 shows you most of that.
If Councillor Bacon is referring to the first consultation we undertook in November.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was a a variety of different options, indicating different increases that the trade would like to see from numerous different operators. What I did in that instance, Councillor Bacon, was to put those proposals into those options.
Okay.
Okay, so the options 1 to 4 were options which are all combinations of what was proposed by the trade. Options 5 and 6 were ones that I had put together.
Yeah, it was more the fact that we've got a lot of figures here and whether there was any useful commentary on those figures.
Going back, the main reasons cited for increase were the increase in costs for running the vehicle, and then they made their individual proposals for increase. I'm quite happy to share them with you if you wanted to see them individually, Councillor Bacon, but I felt that there was quite a few to put into a document.
Sure. Well, as I say,
but the key bit was the second part of the consultation, which we then put together, which they then completed that questionnaire, which you have in front of you.
Yeah. No, I think given the explanation you've given, I'm content. The second question of the three I have is the chair just said that drivers don't have to charge the maximum fare. Do we know if any or many charge less than the maximum? How to what extent is that relevant?
I don't think I have that evidence to demonstrate whether they do or they don't, Councillor Bacon. It would be wrong of me to make a statement either way.
And the third question I have is looking at the highlighted portion on the A3 sheet you've sent round. On the face of it, it does look like there's a significant increase in a number of areas. I note that we move to the stage where the public can express their views, but what will be the mechanisms by which public views can be sought? Because there are some who do rely on taxis quite heavily. So what steps will be taken to ensure that the greatest possible knowledge of the proposed changes and ability to respond is given?
I think that's a very, very good question. The statutory requirement is for us to advertise in a local newspaper. I'm not sure that will cover the right demographic and the total demographic we need to do so. I think that we'll do a consultation within our own through our own website, and I think we probably need to put the consultation out to some of the other user groups such as Age Concern, Sight for White, etc., to ensure that they get the opportunity to comment on those users. We will never cover every single eventuality or every single user group, unfortunately, but we will do our best to cover as many as we possibly can. And I'm happy to listen to any suggestions if you have, Councillor Bacon, of who I need to contact.
Well, I think the idea of engaging with Age Concern is a particularly good one, because some of these are going to be effectively, I may be being a bit simplistic, but possibly 100% increases on some fares, and people need to know about that. As there's a chance for them to respond and comment on it.
I think it's also important that we cover all demographics, not just those more elderly people who may use the rides to pick their shopping up and get home from the local supermarkets, but also some of my major concerns is the nighttime economy and ensuring that we're providing a safe passage home late at night for groups of people and individuals.
Can I suggest on that we therefore ensure we advertise the consultation via our own Facebook page, so that it can potentially get onto the Isle of Wight community page, because the younger demographic are more likely to respond to social media than they are to an advert in the newspaper.
Yes, Chair, I'm busy writing these down now.
Councillor Hastings.
Thank you, Chairman. First question to Kevin, just how often do we do these price reviews?
How often
does this process take place?
We have a requirement to do it, and we do it every November, but we only bring it to the licensing committee if we feel or the trade feel that there is a need to increase the fares.
Okay, so it's an annual.
It's an annual review, but officers only bring it to the committee in the event that we believe there should be an increase.
Yeah. Okay, well, then I'll go into my comments. I made some notes on this earlier. I note that in the Appendix 3, when it comes to animals, 18 said keep it at 50p, 22 said a pound. Well, that's pretty close to each other. Whilst I understand fuel costs are going up and it costs more to fill a tank of fuel for a taxi, there's no fuel involved in animals, so I don't quite see why there should be a rise in that. With regards to the figure itself, at going up to 350, I understand that, again, that costs go up for running costs and fuel, etc., for vehicles. However, we also have the users of the taxi service that, they're going through economic difficulties as well with inflation, general economy, and home fuel prices. So there's an on-cost to them. Inflation has been very low for some while. It's now agreed around about 7%. So in my mind, if you look, it's around about 7%. Maybe push it to 10% for a bit of leeway. That would make it 330, not 350. And that's how I would see it, as a fair way forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Hastings. I just go back to where we were at the beginning, that these are proposals made by the trade, and I understand that the 10% scenario. In your calculations, and I think what we're doing here is looking to consult on what the trade has brought to us as a part of theirs. And one thing we've always done in the past is assured the trade, but we would listen to them on their thoughts and work with them going forward. Some of the tariffs have to be set in a way that they calculate out over a period of time. So you have to have proportions, and you have to be careful of making sure that the cost per mile, the cost per quarter of a mile is a full denomination of monetary value as well. So we can't have 7.5p, for instance, as a quarter of a mile, because there is no.
Sure, but that obviously you would round off.
That's all round off
as required.
Yeah. But it's the way that the calculations work.
Yeah. I mean, my comments are just sort of in principle and just thinking about the whole.
And this may be the conversation that we need to have at the next meeting once we have the comments back from the public.
Sure. Thank you.
Councillor Peace.
Thank you, Chair. Picking up on some of the comments you made, and also on the comments Jonathan made. If we go out to consultation and ask the drivers, well, I pretty much bet my mortgage on it that they're going to ask for price increases. So that's the first thing that puts me off. Secondly, in answer to what Jonathan was saying, will they charge the max? Well, yes. If we give them the ability to charge up to a particular price fee, they are going to charge up to that maximum fee. I do not understand how anyone wouldn't charge the maximum fees possible. It just, from business perspective, they're going to do it. And in my opinion, the fees are already ridiculously high anyway. If you just listen to my daughter when she comes back for a night out in Newport, unless she gets dad taxi, it costs her a small fortune to drive back to Ventnor. And it's not that far, it's 20 minutes, but commonly you're looking at 30 or 40 quid just to get a cab back, which is ridiculous. I've got my own business, or several businesses, and I've absorbed an awful lot of the costs over COVID and over the last few years. I haven't put my prices up. Part of me suggests that why shouldn't the taxi drivers also absorb those costs? Everyone else is having to. And if we have to increase fees, then I don't really like the way the fee structure's been here. I would go with what Steve has just said and look at inflation. Inflation 7%. Okay, so charge 10%, and they can cover their costs that way. That seems to be a much simpler way of doing it, and would probably get more buy-in from the public if we had to do it at all. But to be quite honest, I would rather they absorb the costs at this stage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Peake. Councillor John.
Thank you, Chair. Glad to hear I only have 5 questions, but rather than doing them all in one go, I thought I'd do them individually. Yeah, the first one was feeding back to your issue on availability. I've run into this myself, and so have my friends. Even simple things like getting a taxi from Freshwater down to Yarmouth for a ferry in the morning, when it quite frequently is refused as a fare, not because there's no availability, but simply because you can't find a taxi person who will get out of bed at 6 o'clock in the morning and come pick you up. So I wondered if there was anything that could be done to ensure that, I know that there's a thing in London, for example, that if you get into a black cab, they have to take you to wherever you want to go. Do we have anything similar to do that we can do on the island?
Hackney carriage, or if they're on a rank or get hailed down in the street, should take that fare. There is nothing requiring someone who makes a telephone booking, try to arrange something by telephone for that taxi company to refuse the fare. So there are 2 types of taxis: there's a Hackney and a private hire. These only apply to Hackneys, which are normally on the rank, or you can hail down in the street. They're all silver, and they will all have some kind of light on the vehicle to say that they're readily available. If the orange light is on, or the light is on, and you hail them, or they're on the rank, they have to take your fare. If you ring up to book a fare, they can refuse that.
Even from the same company?
Even by the same company, because it's not Hackney carriage, it then becomes...
Because it's different terms that apply at that moment.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So the next one is, I'm presuming that the fare structure we have here is independent of the type of vehicle. So we're not seeking at this stage to distinguish in any way between electric vehicles and petrol or diesel vehicles. Obviously, the inflationary elements we've talked about occur much more towards petrol vehicles and diesel vehicles than they would to vehicles that were being, charged from solar cells or anything like that.
Yeah, that's correct. These are set for all types of Hackney carriages. We have, I believe, less than a handful of electric taxis on the island at the moment. The total number, I'm not 100%, but they would still be able to, they would still use these tables of fares. The only ones that they do not apply to, as you will see at the bottom of Appendix 4, is non-motorised vehicles such as horse and carts, pedlos, those types of things, which would still be classed as a Hackney carriage.
Okay. The third question is, I think, when I look at the fares, some of them are more than 100%, to Jonathan's point. I think we should be doing everything we can to incentivise taxi sharing. And one of the things we've got is the increase, for example, is still quite high, even if you're sharing a taxi. And I think if we were to try and have a tariff structure that incentivised sharing so that the increase on multiple occupancy taxis was less than the increase on single occupancy taxis, that would clearly be a very good issue both in terms of taxi availability, but also in terms of environmental issues. So just...
Yeah, I understand that and take that comment. I'm not sure much more to add, Councillor Jarman, really.
Okay. Fourth thing then is, I'm getting through the list. The fourth thing is, I wondered whether there was any way that we could automate this process. There are a lot of things nowadays which are done as a combination. For example, the AA running cost, the increase in the cost of living, or wage structures, or petrol. Whether there was a mechanism that we could build into this so that it was automatically reviewed every year, rather than it having to come to a committee and have this debate and consultation exercise. Is there an automated mechanism?
In answer to that is yes, there's a spreadsheet, and I'm happy to go through that with you afterwards. So I think that might demonstrate how that's done, and that takes into account the wage, the running cost, the insurance, the price of fuel, etc. Based on years ago, the RAC and the AA used to do the cost of running a petrol and a diesel vehicle. They don't do it in the same way they used to. So what we have done is applied some inflation to that, which would demonstrate that possibly there is a need to increase the table of fares. So there is an electronic document which officers use to arrive at that point to enable us to go out to consultation.
And is it possible for us to automate that mechanism, rather like a company would, for example, for how many pence per mile they charge, have an automatic mechanism so there doesn't have to be a review or a consultation exercise, simply to have, you know, an inflationary or whatever the calculation give you every year. Then we wouldn't have to think about it even.
So what officers, we do that calculation process, and if it demonstrates there isn't a need to increase, we wouldn't carry it out.
Okay.
We only then, if it shows that there should be some form of increase taken into account the costs of running a vehicle, we then carry out that consultation process. I'm not sure if I answered that for you, Councillor Jarman.
Not completely. I was trying to
The
find a way
the automated system,
of automating things, so it didn't even need to come before a committee.
it wouldn't come to you.
Here's an automatic calculation.
Yeah,
It's in place.
I input the figures.
Yeah, 6th of April
Spreadsheet.
every year or something.
Yeah, the spreadsheet calculates it. It tells me what the cost of mile is and a quarter of a mile. We make that decision based on the existing table of fares. If that then shows there isn't an increase, we don't carry that motion forward. We just.
But if it does show there is an increase, we can't just automate that process to run year after year after year without intervention. We still have to follow.
My understanding, Councillor Jarman, is that we have a legal duty to go to public consultation on this.
Yeah, we have no choice.
So we have to do a consultation every increase, not just to the scheme by which we.
Any increase that we would recommend, the legal framework requires us to carry out a 14-day consultation each time we choose to change the table of fares. We have no choice. That's the legal framework.
Okay. The other one is if I'm seeking to hire a taxi and I want to find the one which has the most competitive fare, how do I do that if I'm looking at taxis on a taxi rank?
Only by.
I knew that was going to come.
Only by asking the driver what
Okay.
he will charge to take me from point A to point B.
And walking along the rank and choosing the cheapest one.
Yeah.
That's permitted.
That's permitted, and you can take any taxi off the rank you like. The trade don't necessarily like that because they like the first person to go off, and there is an equity on the rank that people should take into account, always use the first rank, and you'll find that a driver will say you should be using the first driver in the rank, unless they probably had a bad day, then they may negotiate. But you're quite within your rights to do that.
That's all.
What most of them will say is, I'll charge you what's on the meter.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's where private hire
Yeah.
is different, because you can negotiate your fee over the phone or when you're booking that of how much it will cost you to take from A to B.
Understood. You'd be glad to know, Chair, that's the end of my 5. Thank you.
That's why they're all the same colours. Pink one.
Yeah. I know.
Quick question from me, Kevin. When was the last time we actually increased the fares?
We increased Tariff 1 only in 2019. So the daytime tariffs between 8 AM and 10 PM were increased in 2019. The remainder of the tariffs were left, and they've taken them slightly out of sync in the way that they're proportionally increased, as you'll see on the current table of fares.
So when
Prior to that was 2014.
So some of these fares haven't changed since 2014.
Correct, Chair.
I'm happy to propose, if you want, that we accept the recommendation, Chair.
I was just looking to see if Councillor Adams or Councillor Fuller had any comments.
Yeah, I have a question. It's 35 replies.
Can you turn your microphone on? So,
Sorry. Of the 35 replies that were received, what percentage of the operators does that amount to?
Thanks, Councillor Adams. Of 35 of them, 34 were independent representations, and the 35th was from the Taxi Association. The Taxi Association states that they have over 50 members, and what is very difficult to work out is that there are about 125 proprietors, and the proprietors mean that they own a vehicle. And there's, on top of that, there's another 198 drivers. 298, somewhere around that figure of drivers. So it is quite a small proportion of people who responded. Some of the proprietors are drivers as well.
Owner drivers.
Owner drivers, yeah. So, and that's Hackney. The drivers have a joint license, Hackney and private hire. They can drive either. But we have about 184 Hackney carriage vehicles on the island at the moment, which are owned, some are multiple are owned by different companies. So some have more than one vehicle license to them.
Thank you.
Any more questions? In which case, I think we'll move to the recommendation. And we've got the recommendation in front of you that the existing table of fares be agreed as amended in Appendix 4 to this report, and that statutory notice of the amended table of fares be duly published in at least one local newspaper circulating in the area, setting out the amended table of fares, stating in that notice a specified period of not less than 14 days within which objections can be made, and that such notice be made available for public inspection at the offices at County Hall. Do I have a proposer? Councillor John, seconded by Councillor Fuller. Are we all in favour? That was overwhelming. Wasn't unanimous, but it was overwhelming. Against. One against. Right, so now we move on to the final item on the agenda, members' question time. Do any members have any questions? Councillor Jarman has a question.
Is there any further training which is planned?
That's
I know we had compulsory training in the past. I'm sure there's refresher training or something that comes up at some stage next, rather than nothing for the next 3.5 years.
It's a very good question.
I'm quite happy to put on some training sessions for the members of the committee, and perhaps I'll sit down with the chair and we'll look at areas of licensing that perhaps we need to cover. We did a very short, sharp introduction just under a year ago when you come into position, and we did some short one just before Christmas around about licensing of taxis and fares. So yes, I'm more than happy. Perhaps if there is any particular parts of licensing that you would be interested in, I'm more than happy to put that on and bring you up to date with the legislation and whatever. Primarily, the main role of the committee is around policy, and also the subcommittee hearing license applications. So we perhaps could do some training around subcommittee hearings and doing some work around license applications and giving you some scenarios to chew over, and perhaps some real life ones which we've dealt in the past with, and see if you come up with any difference to what the committee did at those times. Or way back, we used some a long time back. We did some that Sarah probably wrote.
That sounds very, very good. Thank you for that, Kevin. I was just about to say one other thing, and then I'll happily listen to Councillor Jones and then Councillor Fuller after that. We'll listen to Julie first and then you, Paul. I was just going to say, if you do have any particular things you would like training on, send them in via email to copy both Kevin and myself in, and we'll take that forward for you. Julie, wherever you are.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate, I couldn't come in today, so I appreciate you letting me ask a question. It was really perhaps something that could be offered in the training that Mr. Winston's going to be put forward, but just wondering if there could be looking at the tie-in between permitted development rights, new development rights in towns and villages, and how that might, that's to residential, and how that might impact on licensing, for the, especially thinking, of yeah, the sort of where our towns are now, and if we get more people living in towns, would that have a negative effect on either party, really? So it's something to be picked up. I'd imagine it's something that's talked about in the professional circles.
Any comments?
I think I probably need to have a conversation with you, Councillor Jones-Evans, just to scroll down exactly where what you're actually talking about, and then we can decide that around that training, Councillor Jones-Evans, if that's fine.
Okay, Councillor Fuller.
Thank you, Chairman. With respect to training, because our meetings are very, very short, is there a chance that we could have our training tagged on to the beginning of our next meeting? It just seems, every time we seem to meet as a licensing committee, we're usually gone within half an hour. I think this is a prolonged meeting, but it just seems to make sense if we're going to have training to have an hour on beforehand. The second question I wanted to ask was, have we heard anything back about the firework motion that we put to full council? And I was wondering whether you can give us an update on that, Chairman.
I have heard nothing at this point in time on the firework motion. But it was for the council to write to the government. I haven't actually seen the draft of that, so it's a good point. I will chase that up. Any other members' questions? In which case, I will close this meeting. Thank you very much, everyone, for attending. This is now going out for